Hello and thank you for joining us today. My name is Wesley Boudreau, one of the ExxonMobil focused advisors here at the Retirement Group. Today we're going to talk about the ExxonMobil savings plan and the transition process from employee to retiree, some different mistakes we see and some different ways to manage your taxes appropriately so you can maximize your income throughout retirement. Before I get started, a couple of quick reminders. If you do have any questions, go ahead and use that Q&A box you have on the screen there. Your information is anonymous, so your name will not pop up, so feel free to ask whatever questions you have. We would try to get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to it, we'll try to follow up with you as well. There's also a chat box where we will periodically put some information in there for you to follow along with. Different items like how to schedule an appointment with myself or one of the other advisors in the office, how to follow us on LinkedIn and get the specific ExxonMobil information from us. Maybe a survey to ask us how this webinar went, or maybe new topics you'd like to see, things like that. So just keep an eye out there. And obviously, we've worked with ExxonMobil employees for quite a long time, but that does not mean we are endorsed by nor employed by ExxonMobil. But again, should you have any questions and you want to dig into the details of the plans, just let us know. We'll be happy to do that for you and get you the right direction. So, quick reminder for those of you who do not know who the Retirement Group is or haven't sat down with us in a while. We are an independent financial advisory firm that focuses on working with corporate employees and helping them transition into retirement. We've been doing this for a little bit over 30 years. For a large chunk of that, we've been working with ExxonMobil employees. What that allows us to do is our ExxonMobil focused advisors have a deeper understanding of your benefits plans, whether it be the pension, the 401k, healthcare, retirement, life insurance, how that transitions, things of that nature. Our goal is to help hold your hand through that transition process and help you plan ahead of time so you can maximize the benefits you get from Exxon. So when you walk out that door, you can get as much benefits as you can to start that process to enhance your retirement living as you move through retirement. And we do have offices throughout the country, so rest assured if you need to sit down with somebody face-to-face, we can probably still accommodate that. But obviously, this day and age, it's very easy to have web meetings, phone calls, emails, whatever your preferred communication is, just let us know. One of the biggest things we recommend you to do, if you haven't done so yet, or it's been over a year since we've seen a lot of changes in the market and changes in interest rates affecting the pensions, is to run a cash flow analysis. This is essentially a detailed financial plan specific to you as an ExxonMobil employee, where we can give you the ins and outs of the pension and 401k plan, help you look at different various retirement dates. Maybe you have a specific date in mind. You want to retire at 60, or maybe when your son graduates from college or something like that. We can run those scenarios, and we can also look at alternative scenarios. Maybe you want to see if you can retire a little bit earlier, or if I worked a little bit later, how much can my nest egg increase? We are not going to shy away, though, from telling you that you need to work longer if you do. We run this from a conservative standpoint, so that way when we tell you something, we know we're pretty accurate on what we're telling you because of that conservative scenario. It also is a great way to understand the pension options, because ExxonMobil is a unique company where they give you choices of a split pension, where you can take a partial lump sum and a partial annuity in 25% increments. So we can run through different scenarios to show you those options as well. So you see how everything plays out, not just now, but in the next 10, 20, 30 years or so as well, and how it's going to play out for you and your family. So for today, we're going to talk about taxes and go through a lot of different things. First, we'll kind of get into some different tax changes. We'll talk about the Secure Act, Secure 2.0, and we'll talk about the tax brackets, where they are right now, and how that can be beneficial to you in this low tax rate environment that we're seeing. But first and foremost, the Secure Act, which actually came out, was signed in December 2019, enacted in 2020, was the first major change to IRAs and 401ks across the board. Now we've just had the Secure 2.0 come here for 2023. We'll get to that in a moment. But the first changes that went through the Secure Act were a couple good and a couple bad. One of the good ones was a stretching of the RMD age. It used to be 70.5, where you were forced to take your required minimum distribution. So what that means is you're able to put money tax deferred into an IRA or the ExxonMobil 401k plan and let that grow and compound tax deferred and never pay taxes until you physically take that out. Now, some of you might be lucky enough not to need to tap into it, but what happens is at age 70.5, formerly, the IRS will come knock on the door and say, hey, you have to start taking distributions so we can tax you on this. So that used to be 70.5. That got moved to 72, and we'll see later the Secure 2.0, it got moved again to 73 starting this year. So we'll get into that in a little bit later. So that gives you an extra year and a half, or now 2.5 years of potential tax deferral, which is good. But for us, it's more of a benefit for Roth conversion strategies, which we'll give a quick example later. But this is something that we work on with most of our retirees when we manage the taxes year by year, because tax brackets change. One of the bad things that happened And unfortunately, I went through this with an ExxonMobil employee pretty soon, right after the Secure Act came into passing, is the elimination of the stretch IRA. It used to be that if you were leaving, it still is, if you leave money to your spouse, he or she can continue to take those payments out over the course of their lifetime, or your RMD if you'd already started them. But it also used to be the option where if, let's say, God forbid, you passed away and then your spouse passed away soon after, and you guys left money to your kids, they can stretch that out over their life. Now they can't do that any longer. Now they have to get that out within a 10-year period. And unfortunately, I had an employee that passed away, in January of 2020, so right as this got started, and we had to go through that process. And the best we could do is kind of stretch that out over 10 years. So the best we can do is get about 1/10, roughly, give or take, obviously market inflation, or market fluctuations from that portfolio. So this is really something to plan for if you're thinking that you're going to pass money on to your beneficiaries that are not your spouse, or even if you're going to pass to your spouse and you think he or she's going to pass beyond you and there's still going to be some assets left over. Because let's play out an example. Let's assume you've got $1 million passing on to one child, and hopefully that child's maybe in their 50s or something because you've lived a good life, or maybe 60s. But let's say they're in their 50s and they're making good money at their job. Now they're going to have to take out at a minimum about $100,000 a year. So that's going to probably bump them up into a higher tax bracket, cost them more tax-wise on that inheritance than what it otherwise would have if we had planned accordingly. So if you have any questions on this, just always circle back, give us a call. We'll be happy to go through it with you. Another thing that was a benefit was the elimination of the age restrictions. It used to be tied to that age 70 and a half RMD rules, where once you hit that, you can no longer make contributions to your to an IRA or a Roth IRA. So even if you were working still, you couldn't do that. Now in a 401k you could, but an IRA or Roth IRA you couldn't. That has been eliminated. So you can be 85 years old, you can be 95 years old, you can be working at Walmart, work at Home Depot or a local hardware store, whatever it may be. As long as you have earned income, you can still make contributions to a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA. So that's a great benefit that they changed as well. So let's talk about some of the tax brackets. And this is going to be a pretty busy slide, so I'll zoom in here in just a moment. But ultimately, it's important to understand the tax brackets as you transition to retirement and understand the potential changes of those, because they typically change throughout the course of administrations. You're not going to see the same brackets for the rest of your life. And I think it's a safe argument to think we're in probably the lowest tax brackets we've been in a long time, and probably will be. So that's where it becomes important to focus on tax planning on top of investment strategies for retirement, because the goal is to make sure you keep as much as you can in your pocket versus doling out too much to Uncle Sam. And we can look at reviewing those different options year by year to make sure you can maximize that. One of the best things to look at is, we talked about that RMD before, is possibly making sure you minimize the RMD you have to take out later in life, because at that point, regardless of where tax brackets are, if they're up at 50% or 60%, you have to pay those taxes, so you have no control over it at that point. So let's say if you retire at 60, 62, 65, you still got some time before 72 or 73 where you have to take that RMD. So we will look at a review usually in the fall. That way we've got most of the time behind us. There's no surprises on your income needs. And we can run an analysis to figure out what your income tax bracket is and figure out, hey, does it make sense to maybe do a Roth conversion for a portion of this? Pay some taxes now, so that way you know you never have to pay taxes in the future, whether it be yourself or your beneficiaries. It goes back to that same example or problem we said about the non-spouse beneficiary options. So let's look at a quick example. I'm not going to expect you to pick up all of this, but let's go ahead and look at some of these tax brackets. We're still in the 10, 12, 22, 24, 32, 35, and 37% tax bracket. But in that Roth example I gave you, let's look at that second column, or that third column, which is for married individuals. And let's look at the 12% tax bracket. The top of that 12% tax bracket is $83,550. And if we look at the very bottom of this, the standard deductions is actually up at about $25,900. So essentially about $26,000. So if you add the two of those together, assuming no itemized deductions and you just look at standard deductions, you can get, close to about $109,000 at the 12% tax bracket. So let's assume maybe a married couple has retired, they've got their assets in their IRA, and maybe they're only living off of $70,000, for instance. So what that means is they've got another $39,000 they could potentially take out at a 12% tax bracket, which I would argue is a pretty low tax bracket. And you can actually take that out, pay the 12% now, convert that to a Roth IRA, and that $39,000 will grow tax-free for the rest of your life as long as you keep it there for 5 years. So again, this is a tax benefit that can be done year by year. If you go up in the 22% bracket, 24% bracket, it can still be done. It's just that break-even analysis to recoup those taxes a little bit longer. And if you've done any Roth conversions, there's a lot of different ways to kind make sure you can minimize potential losses on that. So give us a call. We can walk through the appropriate strategy to do so. Because what you'd hate to do is convert and then all of a sudden see a downward pressure on the market or on your portfolio, and you pay tax at a little bit higher rate given that. There's also, we have on here long-term capital gains. Those are going to be 0, 15%, or 20%. And this is, again, dependent upon different income levels. But historically, and hopefully going forward, we'll always see long-term capital gains lower than ordinary income. This is something that gets into NUA analysis. We can talk with you about one-on-one with a copy of your statement. You can run through a full NUA analysis to show you if you have any net unrealized appreciation on your ExxonMobil stock. And you can either pay 0, 10, or 15, 0, 15, or 20% long-term capital gains. Now, the next slide is going to be just the same thing, but it's the 2023. So again, nothing major, no changes to the brackets, but you will see that the actual dollars have been inflated and changed. So now that 12% bracket, going back to that same example I gave you before, caps out a little bit over 89,000, and the standard deduction is now just shy of about 28,000 for a married couple in the same example. So what that means, instead of that 109, now you're up to close to 117 or so. So there's what is that, about $8,000 more that you could potentially convert to a Roth IRA. Now keep in mind, this is where the tax brackets are now, and they're going to potentially change in the coming years. So that's why we run this year by year to make sure we understand your situation. So any question on there, just give us a call. But we do coordinate this with the cash flow analysis that we do. The other question is going to be coming, where do I live? How am I going to be taxed locally or by my state, if at all? So we've got a lot of individuals we work with, obviously ExxonMobil, in Texas. There's others in California, others up on Northeast. They're pretty much spread all over. It's obviously because it's a global company. But one of the questions we want to know is, are you going to stay in the same state, or are you looking at retiring somewhere else? For instance, maybe you're working in California and understand, hey, there's pretty heavy taxes, and I'm thinking about moving to a different state that either has a lower tax bracket or no tax at all. States like Texas, Nevada, Florida, Tennessee, things like that that do not have any state income tax is a big difference to paying 6, 7, 8, 9% state income tax, and it could stretch out your cash flow analysis by a couple years or more. So it is something to consider. Another thing you may not understand or may not realize is some of these states that even have state income tax, they may not tax your Social Security, or they may not tax your pension, but maybe they tax IRA distributions. So there's a lot of different nuanced rules to understand there. So again, give us a call to run through that cash flow analysis and determine where you're thinking about living in retirement. We can run these side by side, so you can see one state versus the other to see what that overall long-term analysis is going to look like for you. So I talked before about the Secure Act coming into play in 2020. Now we've got Secure 2.0, which just came into effect here in 2023, which built upon Secure, this original Secure Act, and had a lot of different things that were added to it. The bulk of them were more for 401ks and kind of making them more accessible to part-time employees and things of that nature. But some of the good changes that happened for ExxonMobil employees, if you would, is going to be the pushing out of the RMD age a little bit later. Now it's 73, and it's actually slated to go to 75 in 2033, so even farther. A reduction in the potential penalties if you forget to take your RMD. That used to be a pretty hefty fine, where it would be a 50% fine if you forgot to take out your RMD. So again, that's been reduced. And then there's no RMDs on Roth 401k accounts. This is actually a good thing. It used to be that if you had a Roth 401k and you hit that RMD level, excuse me, you were forced to start taking distributions, RMDs, just like you were for your regular pre-tax portion. That's been done away with. But again, we still, with the ExxonMobil plan, we'll go over it with you one-on-one, but it's very limited as far as the investment selection. So usually it's beneficial to roll that over to a Roth IRA so you have more choices. But we can always go through that one-on-one. But if you do decide to keep it in there, you don't have that RMD to worry about on the Roth 401k side. Higher limits as far as charitable contributions out of your IRA. Higher catch-up contributions being indexed in for inflationary pressure. Also a new one, not all the companies have instituted this yet, it's going to take some time, but Roth matching contributions. This is where you can actually elect your matching contributions to be put into a Roth IRA versus a pre-tax company match. Now, if you do this, so you'll pay taxes on it. So let's assume that ExxonMobil gives you a $5,000 company match contribution this year. The normal process is you get that company match, it grows, and you pay taxes eventually when you take it out. If you do the Roth portion, that $5,000 goes in there, and whenever you take that out, it's going to be tax-free as long as you're 59.5. But you're going to have to pay tax on that $5,000. So whatever your income is, let's say you got $100,000 of income, it's going to show you as 105 because you're paying taxes on that $5,000, that Roth that Roth matching contribution, just to be aware of that. There's going to be a lost and found, portal. We'll see how the government does that. They're infamous for not doing the great websites, but they're going to have a tracking website for those of you that may have changed jobs multiple times and trying to track down something. Potential 529 rollovers to a Roth IRA up to $30,000. So maybe you set up a 529 for your kids or grandkids, and they're not going to use it or don't need it. You can roll that over to a Roth IRA for yourself. And then matching contributions on student loans. What this means is usually for the newer hires that are still out of college, maybe have a student loan they're paying on, instead of making contributions to the 401k plan, if they're making their student loan payments, they can get matching contributions. That's again another one that's going to take some time for the companies to sort out and get situated. So let's talk about the transition process and some of the different options you have at ExxonMobil between your 401k plan and moving into retirement and looking at IRA options. Keep in mind that 401k plan is one of the, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I started out in the 401k industry, so I've seen thousands of plans. But ExxonMobil's got one of the cheapest plans, if not the cheapest plan ever out there. But with that being said, it's also one of the most limited as far as investment selections. You don't have that many choices in there. So usually if you want more choices, that's where that IRA comes into play. And before we get into there, let's go and do a quick update on interest rates, because that's what everybody's always kind of concerned about, especially with what we went through last year with the quick rise in interest rates. We knew this was coming. We didn't expect it to be as severe, though. But what happened was, a quick reminder for those of you that are looking at taking the pension as a lump sum. This is only if you're taking it as a lump sum. If you're taking it as an annuity, there's no bearing on interest rates. But if you're taking it as a lump sum, what happens is Exxon goes out and says, okay, well, this person is XYZ years old. Based upon longevity tables, they've got, let's say, 20 more years of life. They're getting an annuity of $3,000 a month for the rest of their life. Now we have to go out there and look at interest rates to calculate a net present value to figure out, okay, how much are we going to give this person for them to essentially go out and try and recreate that same paycheck themselves. So when interest rates were lower, they had to give you more money to go out and try and recreate that because interest rates were lower. Now the interest rates have come up, they don't have to give you quite as much. So we've seen, what we saw during the pandemic was a sharp rise in lump sums because the interest rates were driven down drastically. Now we've seen a bounce back, that pendulum swing the other direction, and we've seen a sharp decline in lump sums. But what we'll see hopefully is this will level off at some point and we can kind of get to a better range with a little bit lower rates. They're not going to be as low as they were during the pandemic, obviously, but a little bit lower. And what happened was we saw them kind of peak in October. Then the interest rates came down in November, December, January, and then now they just kind of bumped back up a little bit in February, which we don't have on this chart because ExxonMobil does theirs on a quarterly basis. What they do is they look at the second and third month of the prior quarter to determine what that average is for your next quarter. So if we look at this right here, we've got Q1 and Q2 up here. And there's three different segments. There's the first, second, and third. The first segment is going to be the first 5 years of retirement. Second segment is going to be for years 6 through 20. And the third segment is going to be for years 21 and beyond. So for most of us, that second segment has the highest weighting because it covers 15 years of retirement. So if we look at that Q1, I'm going to zoom in here because I can't even see it without my glasses. If we look at Q1, that second segment, we were at 4.94%. Then we jumped up to 5.38%, which is the highest we've been. And if we look at that, it's based upon the November and December interest rates, which were 5.6, came down to 5.15 in December. Now, January actually came down to the high fours, and then it bumped back up to 5.12% for February. So we'll see what happens in March, but if March does not move too much, we'll likely get a slightly lower interest rate for the third quarter. So those of you that were pulling the trigger and looking at retiring right now, and you're thinking about taking the lump sum, it may be beneficial to, you can still retire, but you can defer commencing your benefits. So if you have questions on this, give us a call. This is something we monitor on a monthly basis and let you know where you stand. Because a lot of times if we see sharp changes in interest rates, it could mean tens of thousands of dollars, $30,000, $50,000, even more of changing your lump sum. So it's very important to know that. All right, so jumping back into some of the different tax situations. If you take that lump sum, that pension, you can roll that over to an IRA. Also, you can actually take your 401k plan and you can roll that over to an IRA as well if you want more choices, like I said before. Excuse me. So, excuse me. But keep in mind, if you do that transfer, it's just a transfer. You're not taking a withdrawal and moving it over. You're just moving from like assets or like a vehicle to a like vehicle. It's a tax-deferred 401k to a tax-deferred IRA. So there's no taxes. You do get a 1099 with coded G that shows you that's a transfer just for tracking purposes. And then from there, you can invest or do whatever you want, work with a retirement group or do things on your own if you like, but you don't pay taxes until you physically take withdrawals from that at that point in time at whatever your tax bracket is. And if you're not 59.5, you could potentially see a 10% penalty. And we'll get into some different options around that in just a moment. I know a lot of people at ExxonMobil have actually put in some after-tax money because Exxon gives you a benefit of having access to that. So let's say maybe through the years you put in 10%, maybe half and half between pre-tax and after-tax, or maybe a different breakdown, or maybe you put all after-tax. So what happens is if you put pre-tax money in, let's assume you make $100,000, you put in $10,000, 10%. If you put in $10,000 pre-tax, that's going to go in there pre-tax, and it's going to grow, and eventually you'll pay taxes on it whenever you take it out. But you're going to get a deduction right now for your taxes. So instead of showing the IRS you made $100,000, it looks like you made $90,000 because you take that $10,000 deduction. So it saves you taxes now, but you're paying more later when you retire. Now, if you do an after-tax contribution, then that same $10,000 is going to go in, but it's going to go in on an after-tax. You don't get that tax deduction, so it still looks like you made $100,000. But when you take that out eventually, you take that $10,000 out tax-free. The growth, the earnings, whether it doubled or tripled or just earned $1, that's all going to be taxable whenever you take that out. So the benefit Exxon gives you is, unfortunately, if you get into hard times or you need to access something, maybe you built up, $20,000, $30,000 after tax, you can tap into that if you need to. But a better way, if hopefully you're not tapping into that and you don't want to exhaust the earning powers of that, is to actually do what's called a Roth rollover. It's something the IRS instituted about maybe 2015, 16, I think. So it's been around for a while now. But what happens is if you got after-tax money in there, let's say you got that $30,000, you can actually roll that over to a Roth IRA so that now that starts growing tax-free versus tax-deferred like it would have been in the after-tax. Now you can also look at in-plan conversions, but keep in mind, or rollovers. But again, you're limited to the investment choices. This is a good opportunity to get more investment choices, some protection options maybe if you want on that Roth IRA, and also a great way if you want to test drive the services of the retirement group. You can start with a small amount, kind of see what we're all about, so that when you get to retirement, it's maybe a smoother transition, or you at least know a little bit more about us when you put our hat in the ring for helping you out in that transition process. So any question on there, give us a call, but it's best to kind of get us a copy of the statement. We can run through that analysis for you because it is a proportionate basis, so they go through the ins and outs of that with you as well. Let's talk about the transition process once you've actually retired and you start taking money out of your 401k or your IRA, wherever that money may be, and how you should do so. The classic rule is going to be that you don't want to pay taxes. You want to defer, defer, defer as long as you can. And that's what pretty much every financial tool runs, and most advisors will tell you. But in reality, it might be slightly different as a better option to do that. So let's kind of go through here. The old school method again is to attack your taxable accounts first, maybe your brokerage accounts, your savings accounts, then your tax deferred vehicles like your IRA or 401k, and then your tax exempt like your Roth IRA, Roth 401k, maybe municipal bonds, things like that. So if we look at a chart and look at how it plays out, you can take a look at it here. Let's assume somebody retires, they got $1 million, for instance, maybe they got 150,000 in cash or brokerage accounts. So maybe the first 2 years they burn through that. You see that dark orange on the screen. And then they start taking their tax deferred, their IRA, and their Social Security kicks in. So they got that little red bar at the bottom. They're paying taxes while they're doing this. They're paying taxes on Social Security likely, either at 50% of it or 85% of it. And they'll be paying tax on their tax deferred IRA distributions or 401k distributions. And then maybe they wind down and all they have left, they spent that down, and all they have left is going to be Roth or municipal bonds, so it's all tax free, and they're going to eliminate their taxes. So essentially what's happening is they're taking their taxes, they're kind of paying more in like a small chunk or like a stretch of time. And when I say small, this could be 20 years, so not too small. A better option may be to actually layer those and manage your taxes based upon the tax brackets year by year. I showed you earlier the tax brackets where they were right now. That's not where they're going to be in 10 years or where they're going to be in 15 or 20 years. So we have to kind of budget year by year. And the best way to do that is to look at what you need for income when we run that cash flow analysis and figure out what's the best way to access that money to minimize those taxes in that year and future years. So it may be that you say, okay, I want to take some of my tax deferred, my IRA money, and I want to take some of my my after-tax money. And that way we're going to eliminate or minimize the taxes. Let's even go back to that same example. There's no reason for somebody not to tap into their IRA. I'll go back to the same example I said before, a married couple, just keep it easy. If you've got a standard deduction of $25,000, a little bit more than that, but let's just say $27,000 standard deduction, then that means you can take out $27,000 tax-free. So you want to make sure you at least tap into that. Now it does kind of parlay into whether or not you're having Social Security and does that kick up your Social Security tax. We can go through all that with you. but it's definitely good to know. These tax strategies, between this and looking at Roth conversions, can save you tens of thousands, if not over $100,000 on your lifetime easily. So it may be that you kind of piecemeal this. You take a little bit from each different bucket, so that way you manage your tax bracket, and you're going to still pay taxes over time, but you're going to minimize that, and you understand what that tax bracket is. So the guidelines there is going to be fill up your lower tax brackets with tax deferred income each year, at least to that standard deduction level. Be aware of the tax on Social Security. I mentioned there's some nuances there, so you have to understand that. The lower your income is, the more that can creep up to you. If you're taking a good amount of money out anyway, the Social Security is kind of embedded. It is what it is. And then strategically utilize the taxable and tax exempt like Roth and municipal accounts to supplement your income needs. And again, this gets into that strategy I mentioned about Roth conversions, building this up so you minimize that RMD required at 73 as well. So let's talk about distributions. And I mentioned before that if you take a withdrawal before 59.5, it could potentially have a 10% penalty. That's the classic rule, the norm. There are some different ways around this, different issues, and the Secure 2.0 has actually added a couple to that. But different issues, like if you're doing a first-time home purchase, medical expenses over a certain limit, maybe qualified secondary education expenses. New ones are if there's a natural disaster potentially, or unfortunately if you're a victim of domestic abuse, you can get at your assets with a reduction of the penalty. But the one we usually talk about with ExxonMobil employees is the age 55 rule. Keep this in the back of your mind if you're talking to any advisor and you're retiring before 59.5, and they're telling you, hey, roll everything over so we can help you manage it. They're not fiduciaries. They're not acting like a fiduciary. They're acting in their best interest. Even if you say you don't need to touch it and you get another job, we're going to tell you probably to at least leave something in there. Because if you leave the company at age 55 or later, you have access to that 401k without a 10% penalty. What's in the IRA, there's still some access, but it's more hoops to jump through. You have to do what's called a 72T and take payments out for at least 5 years, or look at one of those other options we talked about before. So usually we're going to recommend at least keep something in there, even if you want to roll over to an IRA for more flexibility. So that way you have that if you need to tap into it for any reason, you can do so simply without that 10% penalty. And it's also, you need to keep in mind, again, the limitations on Exxon's accessibility for distributions. Exxon Legacy is only 1 withdrawal per year, and Mobil is going to be 2 withdrawals per year, so you are limited and need to budget that. And then we go through in more detail on the NUA webinar, or we can talk with you one-on-one about NUA and tax treatments associated with that. But that's a way to pay lower taxes on your cost basis of your Exxon stock if you got low cost basis. And the statement will tell us that if you get that over to us. And then again, once we fast forward to age 73, that's when RMD set to kick in. So if we look at it really kind of that time frame between 59.5 and 73, this is an old slide, but showing 72, but now 73 because it's Secure 2.0. You've got that time frame to do what you want, take withdrawals or not take withdrawals. But again, that gets into that planning phase we talked about with Roth conversions and really digging into those options for you as well. So with that being said, the best way to kind of really tie all this together is that cash flow analysis I alluded to at the very beginning of the webinar. Right now, about 3/4 of Americans over 50 don't have a written plan. If you can spend about 10-15 minutes with us gathering some simple data that we can get from you, we can go as simple or as complex as you want to. Give us about a week. We'll put together a detailed cash flow analysis and provide you different options if you want to look at different dates, and go through that with you to show you where you stand. And again, we won't shy away from telling you need to work longer, or we'll tell you, hey, if you work an extra quarter, it's going to be this beneficial. Or if you go earlier, we'll go through all those different options and how it correlates to the pension plan, and also look at the 401k review if you have questions on your allocation, or want to do an NUA analysis, or see if you have any after tax for that Roth rollover option we talked about as well. And then at the end of the day, I'll keep this up here. I'll get into some of these questions. Looks like we had come through. But there's a couple QR codes up here. First and foremost, if you need to reach us, you can always reach us at info@theretirementgroup.com. Send us a question, or if you want to set a meeting, just go through that way. You can also call us at 800-900-5867. And the QR codes are one to schedule an appointment with myself or one of the other advisors. That'll get you into our calendars. Now, keep in mind, these calendars, it's only going to let you set about a week out. So if you need something sooner, give us a call. And another one for our LinkedIn page, so you can get specific on our ExxonMobil LinkedIn page, so we can give you updates on interest rates, plan changes, things like that, or updates on future webinars, so you're always in the loop and know what's coming. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. Let me get to, it looks like we had a couple of questions come through here. Hopefully I can read these. So I apologize for squinting. How do I access my ExxonMobil stock and pay lower taxes? What withdrawal method do I use? Okay, this might allude to maybe somebody asking about NUA. That's one option. So let me kind of go through that first, and I'll think about some other options. But In UA, it's net unrealized appreciation. This is an option where if you've got ExxonMobil stock, which 90-some-odd% of you do unless you've sold out of it because you've at least got the company matching contributions. If you got company stock in there and it has some low cost basis, and the beauty of ExxonMobil, unlike pretty much any other company I've seen, is they keep track share by share of the cost basis. You can go in there and piecemeal and pick out specific shares you want. Most companies do an average cost basis, so as that stock price rises, that average rises as well. And so, historically we saw, people with low cost basis from old shares, but now with the way that in the pandemic when the stock got down to the 30s, we're seeing some low cost basis from that moving up to where we are now. So what happens is, let's just do a quick example. Let's assume you got $100,000 worth of stock and it's got a cost base of $20,000, meaning between you and the company, you've paid $20,000 for it. It's now grown to $100,000. If you didn't know what NUA was and you just took a withdrawal or you rolled it to an IRA, all your distributions are going to be taxable from that point. However, within UA, what you can decide to do is you can actually pay taxes on the cost base of that $20,000 now, and then not pay taxes on the growth at $80,000 or whatever it ends up being in the future until you decide to sell that stock, whether it be a day out or 10 years or 20 years out. And potentially, now they can change this, but potentially if you decide just to let it pass on to your beneficiaries, they could get a step up in cost basis, so any growth beyond that $100,000 could be tax-free potentially. But again, that could be changed through Congress down the road with tax changes, so just keep that in mind. So this is one option, but it's a really complicated option, and sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. So give me a call. I'll be happy to run an analysis for you to let you know what those options are. And there's different triggering events. You have to be retired or over 59.5 are the two key ones. So we'll go through those options and how to actually do those. The other withdrawal funds tax-free. The other thing we talked about was accessing that after-tax money. That's tax-free. You can also roll that over to a Roth IRA, let that grow tax-free. That's probably the best benefit if you don't need it at this point, because you can get tax-free growth. That's the best method. And then there's also options if you do a conversion, you'll pay taxes now, but eventually down the road you don't pay taxes. So those are some options too. But we tie all this into our conversation when we run that cash flow analysis for you. Okay, as a former employee, how can 401k funds roll over into a self-directed account tax-free, where I can choose my own election to fund? I apologize, I'm just blurry. Where I can choose my own election to fund instead of the ExxonMobil pre-elected 401k funds. Okay, so again, as I mentioned before, the ExxonMobil plan, it's a very cheap plan, but it's got limitations. It's only got a couple of index funds in there and ExxonMobil stock and the common assets, which if you haven't checked yet, is paying quite a bit. So it's a really good short-term spot right now. Also, just another caveat so everybody knows, that balance fund they have in there, keep in mind, most of us think balance is 50-50. It's not. The balance fund is actually about 75% stock. So keep that in mind if you're allocating your portfolio, or if you need help, we'll run through that with you. But in this, where you can do a tax-free transfer is what I mentioned before, that if you've retired and you want to do a rollover into an IRA, that transitions tax-free. But again, eventually when you take that money out, it's still going to be taxable. So transitioning from the 401k to the IRA, there's no taxes. That's a tax-free transition. That opens up the world to you. You've got 10,000 choices of investments, whether you want to do them on your own or with a retirement group or another firm like us. We can go through that with you and help you manage that, or give you some pointers on how to manage it yourself. And that gives you a lot more flexibility and choices. And again, that's a tax-free or a tax-free transition. You only pay tax when you physically take money out. And that gets into, again, the Roth or the Roth conversion options, whether you want tax-free distributions down the road. So we can always talk about that as well. Yeah, one more here, then we'll wrap this up, let you guys get on your way. What is the process of using a Roth IRA with my 401k? Should I do it when working or when I am retired? Yeah, so yes, for me, and everybody's different. For me, the answer is yes. Because I think that a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k is the only legal way to avoid taxes. You put money in there, as long as you can afford to do that, it's going to grow tax-free for the rest of your life. So you're going to get a lot more beneficial compounding interest on there. So let's go back to the example I gave, $100,000, to make it easy. So let's assume you make $100,000, and let's assume you look at your budget, you can afford to put in 10%. So you can put in 10% on a pre-tax, after-tax, or a Roth basis in the ExxonMobil 401k plan. On that pre-tax, you put in that $10,000, and let's assume that it grows to $30,000 for this example. So eventually, when you take that $30,000 out, it's all taxable. But you did get a tax benefit on that $10,000 right now, because you got to deduct that from your taxes. So maybe you saved, $2,000 to $3,000 or something like that. If you put in the after-tax, you don't get that deduction now, so no tax savings now. That $10,000 grows to that $30,000. So if you decide to retire and take that money out, that original $10,000 is tax-free, but the $20,000 growth, the $10,000 to the $30,000, that's going to be taxable at whatever your tax bracket is at that time. Now, if you put that money into a Roth 401k plan, that $10,000, same thing as the after-tax, no tax benefit. You don't get that deduction. You don't get to save $2,000 or $3,000 in taxes now. But that $10,000, if it grows to $30,000, when you take that $30,000 out, it's all tax-free, assuming you made it to age 59 and a half. So that's going to save you a lot more taxes in the long run versus making the pre-tax contributions in the short run. So if you can afford to do that, you're not focused on trying to get a tax deduction right now. Again, depending upon your bracket, we can run these to see if you need a tax deduction and drop you from one bracket to the next. For instance, maybe the 22 to the 12, because that's a big drop. We can weigh those pros and cons. But if you can afford to do that and you are willing to pay the taxes now and kind of have it off your hands, the Roth 401k is going to make a lot more sense because you get that tax-free growth over there. So again, everybody's a little bit unique and different, but give me a call and we can kind of go through that and run that analysis for you as well. So with that, if anybody's got more questions or we missed a couple, we'll get back to you. But ultimately, if you have any questions, always you can reach us at 1-800-900-5867. Again, a quick reminder, we've been working with ExxonMobil employees quite extensively for some time, but that does not mean we are endorsed by Exxon nor employed by them. But we've got a deep understanding of your benefits. So if you have any questions, want to run through the cash flow analysis, or just have a quick question that you're not getting the answer from HR or from Voya, just give us a call. We'll be happy to help you out. So we look forward to talking to you, and we hope you have a great day.